Hey everybody, this is your Digital Super Saiyan 3 back here with another video, and welcome to my June pay-per-view review. For the month of June, I chose to do WCW's Great American Bash from 1996. Took place on June 16th, 1996 in Baltimore, Maryland, at the Baltimore Arena. So yes, in the lead up to this show, yes, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall debuted on WCW television. They had been interrupting moments on Nitro and had been challenging WCW to a fight. And will they get their answer on this show? Well, yes, they will get their answer of when and where. But they're not going to know who WCW's got. So, we will learn that the following night on Nitro. So anyway, on to the show. This is WCW's Great American Bash from 1996. This is a damn good pay-per-view. Yeah, it does have a few stinkers, but WCW does tend to have a few stinkers with its pay-per-views. But also, there is some good stuff on the show as well. And there is a lot of good stuff on the show. The commentary is done by Tony Schiavone and the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Yeah, I can't really do that good of a Dusty impression. But, I mean, because Dusty speaks with a lisp and everything. But, yeah, Dusty Rhodes and Tony Schiavone are the two-man commentary team for this show, since Bobby Heenan, who usually does commentary with them, is going to be in the corner of Ric Flair and Arn Anderson later on in the show as they take on the team of Kevin Greene and Steve Mongo McMichael. So, on to the show. Our opening match, we get a tag team grudge match as the Steiner brothers defeats Fire and Ice. Now, in the weeks leading into this show, Fire and Ice, they've had several meetings with the Steiner brothers, but there was no consecutive finishes. There was no definitive winner in each of their matches until now. And now the Steiner brothers finally get their W. They finally get the W over Fire and Ice. This was a really good, entertaining tag match. Probably one of the better matches I've ever seen with Scott Norton in it, because he was part of Fire and Ice with Ice Train. And yes, before that we had the national anthem being played and Sergeant Craig Pittman presenting Old Glory before all this, I forgot to mention. But yeah, like I said, good opening tag match between the Steiner brothers and Fire and Ice, with Rick and Scott getting the victory. So, of course, Rick and Scott were going to get the victory here. Next up, we were going to get into our backstage, one of our first of many backstage interviews, as you have the icon Sting. You have Sting backstage with Mean Gene Okerlund, and Mean Gene interviewing Sting for his match later on in the night against Lord Steven Regal. He talks about Regal's ability, but he also talks about how Regal is so prissy and everything, and about how the Brits and the way the Brits drink tea and everything. It was an okay promo for what it was. Then we're getting into our second match. This is for the U.S. title, as Conan defeats El Gato to retain the WCW United States Championship. And yeah, it's about 6 minutes, I believe. This is a 6-minute match. Nothing too fancy happens. It wasn't as good as Conan's previous title defenses, like he had against Jushin Liger or Eddie Guerrero. I mean, he had a great match with Eddie Guerrero in the opening of Uncensored. And he also had a great match with Jushin Liger at Slamboree. But here, it just felt like a pretty lackluster match than it was against El Gato. Now we're getting into a backstage interview with Mean Gene interviewing Kevin Sullivan with Jimmy Hart, and Kevin Sullivan talking about what he's going to do to Chris Benoit in their Falls Count Anywhere match later on in the night. And this all stems from what happened back at Slamboree during the first round of the Lethal Lottery, where Kevin Sullivan was the reason where Kevin Sullivan held Chris Benoit on the table, allowing Public Enemy to beat them and move on to Battle Bowl. Now we're getting a match for Diamond Dallas Page's Lord of the Ring that he won from Battle Bowl back at Slamboree, as Diamond Dallas Page defeats Marcus Bagwell. Now, Marcus Bagwell only gets this shot at Diamond Dallas Page because he won a coin flip against his partner Scotty Riggs. Yeah, Riggs and Marcus Bagwell, both Bagwell and Riggs had a coin flip in. Because Bagwell won the coin flip, he gets the shot at Diamond Dallas Page. There were some good counters in this match, but not by much to really make me like this match as much. I mean, yes, 1996 Diamond Dallas Page, he wasn't at that main event spot yet. I mean, he would be getting his main event push the following year when he would do that program with Randy Savage in 97. So yeah, 96, Page from 91 to 96 was just a mid-carder guy at best. Lower mid-carder guy, but then he began moving up the card once we got into 97 through 2001. So yeah, Page began moving up the card gradually. But yeah, the Diamond Dallas Page ended up winning with the Diamond Cutter. Nothing more to be said here. And then we're getting into the first best match of the night from this show, and it's the debut of Rey Mysterio Jr. as he challenges Dean Malenko for his WCW Cruiserweight Championship. Now, if you've ever heard Rey talk about his match at the Great American Bash in 1996, Rey talked about how he had butterflies, how he was a nervous wreck when he learned that he was going to be wrestling on a pay-per-view. If you heard those interviews, had he not worked with anyone else but Dean Malenko, Rey would have stunk the house up, but no. Him working with Dean Malenko, and Dean Malenko beating Rey to retain the WCW Cruiserweight Championship, was just so good. Yeah, even though despite Rey lost this match, this debut really helped catapult Rey to have him continue to be someone featured on WCW's pay-per-views through the coming years, as the years would continue to go on. And it showed Rey was a mainstay. This match made Rey Mysterio a mainstay. Had it not been for anyone else but Dean Malenko. And them establishing that chemistry early on just shows you how good Dean Malenko truly, truly was in his career. Anyway, Dean Malenko ends up getting the roll-up on Rey Mysterio when he powerbombs Rey Mysterio in the corner and then has his feet on the middle turnbuckle. 1, 2, 3... Dean Malenko retains the WCW Cruiserweight Championship, defeating the debuting Rey Mysterio Jr. in an incredible match. And of course, Mike Tenay was on commentary for this match. So, of course, Mike Tenay would come out and do commentary with Dusty and Tony for Rey's match. From the big boy from the little boys to the big boys. Now we're getting into the big men. As John Tenta, formerly of the Dungeon of Doom, takes on his former dungeon teammate Big Bubba with the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. And yes, John Tenta in the lead up to this show was kicked out of the Dungeon of Doom and had half of his hair cut off by Big Bubba. So this was a grudge match. And yeah, I gotta say, out of all of the matches on this show, this was probably the biggest stinker of the show. This felt like the big stink that was gonna come. And it smelled so bad. It was a big smelly crap between John Tenta and Big Bubba, aka formerly known as Earthquake and the Big Boss Man in the WWF. John Tenta is Earthquake and Big Bubba as the Big Boss Man, or was the Big Boss Man, and then both of them eventually did return to the WWF. First, Tenta would become the Masked Golga, and Big Bubba would continue to be, well, he would be wrestling under the Big Boss Man name, but as the bad cop Big Boss Man, that would be under the corporation. But no, that wouldn't happen until 1998. We're still in 1996. But yeah, like I said, this was a really big crap. It was probably the smelliest crap in the entirety of this show. Oh, but we're not done yet. Now we're getting into a promo from the Giant. As the Giant, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, is going to talk about how he's going to chokeslam and obliterate Lex Luger. And how Lex Luger is not so smart. Then, of course, we're getting into our second best match of the night, and it's the Falls Count Anywhere match, as Chris Benoit defeats the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan. So, Sullivan, Benoit, in their first ever meeting. Yes, this is Sullivan and Benoit's first official in-ring encounter. This was the first in-ring encounter between Sullivan and Benoit. It starts off, Benoit comes to the ring as he's representing the Four Horsemen. Then, Sullivan comes out with Jimmy Hart, and Benoit goes up to meet Sullivan on the ramp. On the entranceway, they begin brawling heading towards the ring. They were brawling on the outside. They started brawling through the crowd. Then they climbed up all the way to the stairs towards the men's room, to where the men's room is. Okay, this is actually the third time I've actually talked about a bathroom brawl happening on a WCW pay-per-view. WCW's had a lot of these bathroom brawls during some of their pay-per-views. There was the one at Sin, from Sin 2001. There was the one at Slamboree 2000. And now we got one here in 1996 with Benoit and Sullivan. And Sullivan even opens this laundry hatch and takes out a plastic bag full of toilet paper rolls and hits Benoit with it. Benoit slams Sullivan against the wall. Then they begin making their way back towards ringside. The match ends when Benoit power slams, or not power slams, but does a superplex from the top rope on top of a table, which the table is straddled on the top rope. He superplexes Sullivan off of it, and then Benoit goes for the 1, 2, 3, and Benoit is your victor. Then Arn Anderson comes out as Benoit starts continuing to beat Sullivan while he's down. Arn Anderson pulls Benoit off of Sullivan, and then Arn Anderson punts Sullivan in the stomach, and then Arn Anderson and Benoit begin beating down, continuing to beat up Sullivan even more. until the rest of the Dungeon of Doom come out and they run off Benoit and Anderson. And Benoit and Anderson head back to the Horsemen's locker room. And we begin getting into the Horsemen talking about what they're going to do to McMichael and Kevin Greene. Mongo, McMichael, and Kevin Greene. We heard from Randy Savage and the NFL legends Kevin Greene and Steve Mongo McMichael earlier with Mean Gene, so now we're getting the Horsemen's rebuttal and what they're telling Mean Gene Okerlund. And Arn Anderson talks about how Benoit had earned his stripes and had earned the right to be called a horseman. And Benoit talks about how he put Kevin Sullivan in his place. And then Ric Flair, well, Ric Flair does what Ric Flair does best. Of course, yes, I also got to talk about the football players' promo as well. I mean, after all, they had the likes of Randy Savage in their corner. And don't worry, we'll get into that part of the double main event when we get to it. Now we're getting into our next match, and it is a grudge match as you have Sting defeating Lord Steven Regal, aka William Regal, with Jeebs in a really good match here. This was a really solid ground game type of match. This was a match that Regal was, Regal dominated a lot of this match, actually. He dominated a good portion of this match. This was a really well-handled bout between Regal and Sting. They just ended up in having a great match. It's kind of a shame this was their one and only bout against each other, because Sting and Regal, Regal showed, pretty much took it to Sting in this match, but in the end, Sting gets the victory by putting the Scorpion Deathlock on William Regal after backdropping William Regal, and Sting makes Regal tap out to the Scorpion Deathlock, and Sting is your victor. And now we're getting into it as Michael Buffer comes out and we begin to have our double main event. First, you have the team of the Four Horsemen coming out. You have Ric Flair and Arn Anderson with Woman and Miss Elizabeth. And of course, Bobby the Brain Heenan as their head coach for this tag team main event match of this double main event in Baltimore. And then out comes the NFL legends with the Macho Man Randy Savage and of course Kevin Greene with his wife coming out, and Steve Mongo McMichael with Deborah. And, of course, this match was mildly entertaining. This was the better portion of the double main event compared to the last match on this show, which we'll get into soon. We're going to get into it. Don't worry. But, yeah, this was very entertaining from start to finish. Kevin Greene and Steve Mongo McMichael in this match looked great in this match. But, of course, what really brings it down for me is the finish. And, of course, that was when Deborah would come back, no longer wearing the Chicago Bears jacket that she was sporting earlier on in the match. She comes back with Elizabeth and Woman. She has a big-ass briefcase, comes down with a big-ass briefcase full of money and a Four Horsemen t-shirt, and gives it to Steve. And then Steve Mongo McMichael hits Kevin Greene in the face with that metal halberd briefcase and officially becomes the Fourth Horseman and officially replaces Brian Pillman as the new fourth member of the Four Horsemen. So now McMichael has turned his back on Kevin Greene and the Macho Man Randy Savage. A big brawl ensues, And Benoit comes back out, and he begins getting into it, and Savage and Kevin Greene are being beaten down. And now Steve Mongo McMichael is, like I said, the new fourth member of the Four Horsemen. And now we have the moment of truth. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall get their answer. As Eric Bischoff comes out to interview Nash and Hall, he first asks them, "Do you work for the WWF?" And Nash is like, "No," and Scott Hall's shaking no. And then Scott Hall says, but the big man and the medium-sized men are, along with our third man, are gonna carve them out," talking about who they're gonna fight at Bash at the Beach, when Eric tells them that you're gonna get your fight, and it is gonna be at Bash at the Beach. We got our three guys, and you better hope you have your third guy. Whoever your third guy is. Oh, don't worry. We already know who the third guy is, if you already can tell. With Bash at the Beach, if you watched Bash at the Beach 96, you already know who the third guy is. So, yeah. The segment ends when Scott Hall gut punches Eric Bischoff. He punches Eric Bischoff in the stomach, and then Kevin Nash picks up Eric Bischoff and jackknife power bombs him through a table right by the commentator's desk on the stage. So, of course, you have the EMTs coming out to tend to Eric Bischoff, to tend to Eric and carry Eric out of here. And, of course, Hall and Nash walk off, and Tony comes down from his commentator position to go and check on Eric Bischoff, only for Dusty to start talking, and basically talking all by himself. Then, of course, now we're getting into our world title match for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, as the Giant defeats Lex Luger, the former world champion Lex Luger, for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. And this match really wasn't that good at all. It was just your standard David and Goliath, but nothing too fancy. It ends when Luger attempts to go for the torture rack on the Giant, but the Giant's weight was too much for Luger to handle. The Giant collapses on top of Luger, and then Giant picks up Lex Luger for the choke slam. 1, 2, 3. The Giant retains the WCW World Heavyweight Championship and is still the World Heavyweight Champion. And yes, we're going to be having Bash at the Beach on July 7th of that year. So, final thoughts of the Bash at the Beach 1996, or of Great American Bash 1996 for this portion of the Great American Bash. Final thoughts, it actually was a damn good show. It was actually a very solid Great American Bash. Probably better than... It wasn't as good as Great American Bash 97, but certainly better than Bash at the Beach 2000. Or Great American Bash 2000, I meant to say, since I'm talking about Great American Bash. But definitely better than Great American Bash 2000. Because, of course, it's 1996, after all. Anywho, this has been your Digital Super Saiyan 3, and my year of WCW continues in July when I cover the 1994 Bash at the Beach, the very first Bash at the Beach. Anyway, see ya!